Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy, yin and yang. Yin and yang are ancient Chinese concepts. In psychoanalysis, these concepts are not adequately utilized. So today, we shall discuss these concepts with our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. And let's see if we can integrate them into psychoanalysis and explore these concepts with him. Namaste, Mr. Vaidya.
Namaste.
Mr. Vaidya, how are these concepts of yin and yang understood in psychology, philosophy, and spirituality?
Concepts of masculinity and femininity are very ancient concepts. Indian spirituality dealt with this concept in ancient times quite exhaustively. The first conceptualization, which was psychophilosophic in nature, was with concepts of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva was the eternal ground, the stable, immutable, eternal ground, the anchor in manifestation. So manifestation was looked at as in two facets, the facet of stability and the facet of becoming, the facet of change and motion and movement. So ancient Indian spirituality looked at manifestation or the universe in normal language as being composed of two broad categories of constituents. One, the eternal ground, the stable, immutable, absolute eternal ground, which anchors everything. And second, that part of universe which is in constant becoming, constant motion, constant movement, where events take place, forces are at play, and entities undergo a change. And this part was called as Shakti. So the entire universe was visualized as being based upon two principles of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva was the masculine principle, Shakti was the feminine principle. And the masculine principle stood for stability, anchoring, immutability, eternity, and the ground supporting all manifestation which we see. Whereas the entire manifestation, which was a play of intention, forces, entities, processes, and finally events, this was referred to as Shakti. In Western philosophy, we would call this as being and becoming. The Shiva is the being, the constant eternal ground, the immutable, forever absolute. And supporting, anchoring the whole processes of the universe, and the processes, the what we call becoming in the Western philosophy, was referred to as Shakti. Second way of looking at it was, there was stability and there was movement, and the principle below the movement was the principle of Shakti, and the principle below stability and anchoring was the principle of Shiva. So in ancient spirituality, we see both these conceptualizations, Shiva and Shakti, the masculine and feminine, talked about in terms of parts of manifestation or as principles underlying those parts of manifestation. And this is the ancient Indian spirituality. After some time, in Indian spirituality itself, two new words come up. They are those of Purusha and Prakriti, which come up in Sankhya's philosophy. And again, we have the Purusha as the masculine aspect and the Prakriti as the feminine aspect. But the Purusha and Prakriti here are not only referred to in the scheme of the universe, but are also applied to inside of man. And it was not that Shiva and Shakti was not applied inside of man. It was applied in the philosophical sense, also in a psychological sense inside of a man. But after quite some time, we have two new words the Purusha and Prakriti in historical terms. And that is where the Sankhya uses them in a particular way. But the broad thrust is still the same. The Purusha is the witness, the observer, the unchangeable observer inside of us. And Prakriti is all that we see inside of us and outside of us. And once we are stabilized in our Purusha, as we grow in the Purusha, we slowly reach to that transcendental plane where we get in touch with the Purusha of the universe. So that again comes up after many hundreds of years. The same masculine and feminine principle talked of substantially in similar ways, slightly in different ways. And after Sankhya, these words of Purusha and Prakriti went to China. And there they became yin and yang. So historically, it is the Shiva and Shakti, the Purusha and Prakriti, and then we have the yin and yang. And that yin and yang initially in China was as spiritually loaded as it was in India, because the goal in Indian spirituality was to integrate the feminine and masculine aspects in the process of enlightenment. And there were two parts of it. One should be able to be free from the strange hold of Prakriti inside and reach a state of no thoughts, which is free from desire and fear. And there is the experience of bliss, what we call enlightenment. So that was the goal of Indian spirituality. And the goal was approached in various ways. One of the main ways was to create an observer inside and do what Krishnamurti calls in modern language, choiceless self-observe, choiceless self-awareness. So a part of you keeps observing the rest of you, your body, your emotions, your thoughts, your sensations, the flow of energy. And a time comes when what is observed falls down and the observer sees only a blankness in the mind without any thought. And in that state, awareness is heightened. There is a feeling of freedom from all desires and fears, and there is a feeling of bliss. And once the state of no thought is achieved, thereafter the second mode of transformation or the station of transformation is integration. And integration happens at various levels. One of the major elements of integration is integration of the masculine and feminine inside. And that is what is symbolized in India by the image of Ardhanarishwar. That Shiva himself, not the Shiva as the principle, but Shiva as the person, he was able to integrate the masculine and feminine aspects inside of him. And we see that integration of masculine and feminine in painting depictions of many enlightened people. So this was a spiritual understanding of the masculine and the feminine principle and their integration in the process of enlightenment and self-transformation. So this was in India. When it went to China, it became yin and yang. And initially, the emphasis was the same, making both the parts of the personality conscious, integrating both the parts, and before or after the experience of no thought and freedom from fear and desire and the experience of bliss. So that state either preceded integration or it was after integration, but somehow the two had to be done apart from the overall integration of the personality. So this continued in China for some time, and after that it took a philosophical color. From an experiential spiritual zone, the concept of yin and yang got transferred into a philosophic zone. And then the suprahuman application also started. So thereafter, yin was the feminine principle, yang was the masculine principle, And the question came, what all is feminine and what all is masculine? So they started creating a category that anything that is stable, that is strong, that is big, uh, that is demanding, that is protruding, that is heavy, that has potential energy is all masculine. Anything that is flowy, curvaceous, nurturing, flexible, creative, receiving, absorbing, has kinetic energy, all of that is feminine. So that created a non-human application of the concept of yin and yang. So mountains became masculine, rivers became feminine, flowers became feminine, and strong trees became masculine. Elephant became masculine and the deer became feminine. Lion became masculine and the goat became feminine. So when this interpretation was given to yin and yang, it started having application in larger philosophy of how to apply it to the whole existence, not only to human beings. So it was applied to human beings in spirituality, and philosophically it was applied to animals, plants, non-living things, and the whole of the universe. So this became the philosophical application of the concept of yin and yang. And much later in psychology, it was popularized by Carl Jung. And for Carl Jung, and he was, I think, the only person in psychoanalysis to really use to the full extent the concept of yin and yang. And what he did was, he, in his model of the mind, he created two important archetypes of yin and yang. And he named them as anima and animus. So anima was yin, the feminine part of a personality, and animus was yang, the masculine part of the personality. Now, Jung had three important issues here in his theorization and practice. One, the yin and yang were inborn. So everybody had feminine and masculine parts to the personality. Two, they were activated adequately or inadequately based upon experience in the real world. So a really feminine mother or a really feminine person in the environment was necessary to fully activate the yin archetype, apart from the constitutional factors. Same for yang part of it. An overbearing father who does not allow actualization of one's masculinity will not allow the yang archetype to fully display itself. Similarly, an unmanly, a weak father who allows full expression but cannot present himself as an embodiment of that archetype also is not in order. So the first element in Jung was the activation of these two, adequate activation of these two archetypes. The second element was related to balance. Jung used to say too much of on one side leads to too much of the other. So if the conscious life is full of too much masculinity, the dreams will be full of too much of femininity. And the third element was integration, which was a very important part of individuation. So Jung brought it into psychology, and this is where it is. If we look at psychoanalysis, apart from Jung, it has been used only in the sexual aspect to explain homosexuality, bisexuality in human nature. But in fact, the concepts of yin and yang, masculinity and femininity, are not only limited to sexuality, but many other aspects of human nature also, which psychoanalysis, except for Jung, has not fully leveraged.
So, as you've just said, I mean, it got kind of attached to sexual part of our life. So my next question is that can we use them now to understand gender and sexual orientation in a more
Yes.
detailed way?
Yes. And that is where I think the correct way to understanding gender lies. Because in psychoanalytic discourse, we had two extremes. The first extreme was that homosexuality and bisexuality were perversions. And the second extreme was there is nothing like a defensive homosexuality or bisexuality, it always is natural. And therefore, there is nothing to cure. But the truth lies in between. There is natural bisexuality and homosexuality, and there is a defensive bisexuality and homosexuality. And where there is a defensive element, it definitely is a subject for cure. Not that we want the person to have an orientation, but we want the person to make a choice free from the defensive operation. So once the defenses are undone, he is free to choose. He may still choose to be what he was before the defenses were removed. That is not our business, but our business definitely is to free the person's choice from the strange hold of pathology and defenses. Now, this situation is the situation today. If we put the concept of masculinity and femininity, we can understand sexual orientation and gender much better. Let us take two examples, each in heterosexuality, bisexuality, and homosexuality.
And also transgender?
Yeah, transgender also we can look at. Let's take examples in all the four. Say first we talk about heterosexuality, and let us say on a 10-point scale, a heterosexual person has masculinity to the point of 8. So 0 to 10, masculinity is at 8 and femininity is at 4. So in absolute terms, the masculinity is very high, and relative to one's femininity, also there is a gap of 4 points. This would be a very classical constitution for a heterosexual. He would come out as a very masculine person without much femininity to see. Take the second example of a heterosexual, masculinity at 6 and femininity at 4. So he would not be as rough and tough, as masculine as somebody at 8. The absolute value is low, but still there is a gap of 2 points between the masculinity and femininity, with masculinity being on the higher side. So we still are dealing with a soft person, but still a heterosexual. He is not an alpha male, but he is still a heterosexual, whereas a person with 8 and 4 is a classical alpha male. Now let us go to bisexuality. Some person, right, masculinity at 8 and femininity at 7, both are very high. So in absolute terms, he would come out to be a macho person, but he would have huge amount of femininity inside, right? And chances of his being bisexual are very high. And this is what we see in many of the bodybuilders, that they come out as hyper masculine people with repressed femininity, and in their secret lives they are bisexuals. Talk of another example of a bisexual, masculinity at 5 and femininity at 4. Again, we have a softer version of a bisexual, a softer person, but still a bisexual constitution, because the two are very near, the absolute masculinity and absolute femininity. The gap is not enough. Both parts will exert themselves. Talk of homosexuality. In a man, the femininity is at 8 and masculinity is at 6. So biological body is of a male, but psychologically the masculinity is at 6 and the femininity is at 8. It can also be femininity at 8 and masculinity at 4. A clear case of a homosexual constitution. Or you can have femininity at 5 in a male body and masculinity at 2. Again, a softer version, but still a homosexual constitution. Now, the point is, and in a transgender, it would be a similar situation. There would be body of one type and the masculine feminine combination of such an order that the person feels he's trapped in a completely wrong body. So the point is, this is a metaphoric way of understanding. When I say on a 10-point scale, I'm not saying in an empirical sense, I'm saying in a metaphorical sense. But this is a very good way to understand gender, sexual orientation, as well as the type of personality which we ourselves are or somebody else is. And this finding of masculinity and femininity in a person and looking at absolute values of masculinity and femininity and the gap between the two. These two are very important constituents of understanding gender and sexual orientation. My personal feeling is that the concept of yin and yang, masculinity and femininity, is not adequately used for these broader purposes of understanding personality, gender, and orientation.
Have they been used in psychoanalysis?
Except for Jung, we use only the sexual aspect of masculinity and femininity, of yin and yang. So Freud would say that we are essentially bisexual. Another way of saying that yin and yang both are present. But there is a confusion because normally when we say bisexual, we mean there is a compulsive behavior. We don't mean that there are one or two fantasies here and there in the unconscious mind. So when we talk of sexual orientation, we talk of a compulsive nature in the area of fantasies and behavior. We don't talk in terms of essential constitution. So when Freud talks about the fact that human beings are bisexual, he's talking of essential constitution. He's not talking of the essential constitution being strong enough to create a compulsive effect on fantasies and behavior. And that's a wrong word, the wrong use of the phrase. So the right use would be that yin and yang are present. But whether the combination of yin and yang is of an order or of a nature which can compel bisexuality or homosexuality, that's a completely different topic. So Freud used it essentially only in the sexual sense, and that is how most of the classical schools in psychoanalysis use it. The idea there being that unaccepted bisexuality and homosexuality leads to huge amount of moral rage against oneself, which can become self-destructive or get projected out and result in hate crime, anger crime, or in some cases paranoia. So this is the way they use yin and yang in a very crude way and only in the sexual aspect of it. But the masculinity and femininity concepts are not only sexual concepts. Sexuality is only one part of masculinity and femininity. There are many other parts like strength, receptivity, nourishment. So these are also the qualities which are either masculine or feminine. So every person would have strength, every person would have creativity, every person would have stability, and every person would have nurturance, which means the masculine and feminine, both elements are there. Creativity and nurturance are feminine qualities, whereas strength and stability are masculine qualities, the way we define it, of course. So in that sense, yin and yang are present in all people, but the way we look at it in psychoanalysis is in a very reduced way. only related to sexuality, except for Jung, who looks at it in a much broader way and also puts it as a goal of his therapy. So when he talks about individuation, one of the important elements of individuation is integration. And one of the important element of integration is integration of the masculine and the feminine into a whole. And if it does not happen inside, then unconsciously we try to achieve it outside. Because the masculine part of us seeks the feminine part of the partner, and the feminine part of us seeks the masculine part of the partner, and where the jigsaw puzzle fits, a better feeling of wholeness and completeness is felt. So it's very important in a non-sexual way also, in a non-therapeutic way also. But we don't use in classical psychoanalysis the concept adequately. I think it has gone completely out of fashion now, because if you look at all the new therapies which are coming up which have come up in last 20 years, you don't see them factoring in a strong way the concept of yin and yang or integration of them.
How do they play out in pathology?
They play out in terms of sexual disorders. They play out in the form of erectile dysfunction, gender dysphoria. They play out in the form of some anxiety disorders, which are essentially out of unaccepted parts of oneself related to orientation, gender, and related to ultimately to masculinity and femininity. And they can also come out not strictly in DSM pathological terms, but in a broader sense of the term of pathology, in a more existential sense, that one feels unwholesome and incomplete because one has not activated both the parts of yin and yang. Only one is active. The second is not active enough. So even in non-pathological cases, in an existential sense, it does affect the quality of life.
Can they be healed with in psychotherapy?
We have to be careful here because the first principle is we have to heal what needs to be healed. So if we are dealing with a yin and yang situation where defensive homosexuality or bisexuality is at play, or because of yin and yang problems, the person does not feel wholesome, he has a one-sided life, or because of some yin and yang problems, the person is into sexual issues. Those are the areas where we have to be focused upon and be very specific what needs to be healed, and not force people into healing themselves of something that they themselves don't believe is a trouble. So that said, definitely with psychoanalytic exploration, with providing a safe space, with deeper exploration of defenses and early life events, with exploration of fantasies, with exploration of real life thoughts, ideas, and feelings, we can get down to the pathology and defensive operations, if they are there, which are not allowing the natural yin and yang to first come out to the surface and then move towards integration. So this is a long-term, deeper therapy process. This is not something which can be done in a short-term or intense way. It's a slow and steady, deeper exploration of oneself towards awareness of the deeper part of oneself, acceptance, living it out, and then slowly integrating them. So this is almost a kind of a Jungian individuation therapy kind of a process, regardless of which school you use, but essentially it is a process of integration and individuation. Right?
So in
Apart
that
from
case,
psychology,
yeah. In that case, the therapeutic approaches like CBT, DBT, REBT won't be effective in this zone, I guess.
they may have a role to play in the initial part of the process for somebody who is psychologically not sophisticated. But once we get to the deeper aspects of it, I think this is a situation where depth psychology approaches, and in that I would not go for ISTDP, but something which is slow and steady, which gives open time for self-exploration, living, thinking it out with somebody, being accepted, provided a safe space. I would say this is one of those areas where uh, psychoanalytic psychotherapy is one of the best options.
Where in everyday life can we make use of these concepts?
In many areas. For example, let us talk about occupation. How do we screen out people? There are many ways of screening. You look at the area knowledge, you look at academic credentials, you look at past performance, you look at many things. One of the things you can look at is masculinity and femininity, which is needed for the job. In personal relationships, we can also look at the same thing, that based upon our own masculinity, femininity profile, we seek out people on the other hand. What type of masculinity and femininity we want on the other side, so that the jigsaw puzzle fully fits, at least on this parameter. So this is a very important element of overall compatibility. And this is something that few people realize, that one of the elements of discontent in relationships may be the mismatch of masculinity and femininity jigsaw puzzle fit. That somebody who wants a very feminine person is loaded with, is living with a masculine person. So if you want a woman who is very feminine and you're living with a woman who has quite an amount of masculinity, the person doesn't know, but he feels the discomfort. At times he will feel even irritation and rage, and he won't know why it is. The same thing happens on the other side also. That women who want a very softer person can get into a relationship with a very highly masculine alpha male, the rough and tough type, and be in trouble. So in relationship also there is an element. In nurturing roles or caring roles, we require more of yin and less of yang. Whether it's a role of a school teacher or a nurse or a doctor, any sort of healer. And when we look at the occupations which require hyper masculinity, if somebody is looking at security, commando operations, or army, or law and order machinery, or a judge, pure logos, not heroes, but pure logos. So these pure logos occupations actually require high amount of yang. And we should be clear in ordinary life that yin and yang are different often than what the body suggests. Our normal understanding is that if you see a biologically male body, it will have high amount of yang and low amount of yin, and vice versa for a female body, female personality. But we see in reality it is not true. Not only within a male personality, the absolute amount of yang varies, but the relative amount of yin also varies. And the absolute amount of yin and yang and the relative difference between the two is also very important for many personality characteristics which we see on the surface. And often because we are not clear, we feel very discontented, we feel very resentful, we feel very irritated and angry at times. But once it is understood, we can be more at peace because we know the fundamental characteristics of the system in front of us. So there are many applications of this concept, both clinical and non-clinical, in relationships, in education, in occupation, in social design also. So there are a variety of applications, we just have not explored it enough. Hello.
We come to our last question. How does spirituality engage with these two concepts?
Spirituality engages in a slightly different way than uh, psychology or philosophy does. Spirituality is not so much interested in the philosophical aspect of it as much for the purpose of self-knowing and self-transformation. Towards the purpose, it has many different ways of getting in touch with your femininity and masculinity. So, reading scriptures, devotional songs, meditative practices, visualization practices, certain herbal preparations, certain rituals uh, which are used to activate and develop femininity or masculinity, certain activity regimens. All of these are used for exploring one's femininity and masculinity. And in India, particularly, the whole science of idol therapy is very powerful in this regard, that you explore the masculinity and femininity through it. There's also a very powerful technique of Avishkar, which is almost like psychodrama for a particular purpose, but slightly different from psychodrama, but near to it, to uh, explore the masculine and feminine parts of oneself, observe them in operation, go deep inside, bring them out, and then try to integrate. So spirituality has its own basket full of tools and approaches to not only become aware of the yin and yang inside, but also a basket full of tools to develop them and then integrate them. In terms of model of the mind, it's very important to note that in Indian spirituality, the model of the mind, if we put together uh, the different models of the mind and create one comprehensive model of the mind, which I have done, and I call it the heat model. If we do that, then from a spiritual standpoint, yin and yang, like in case of Jung, become structural components of the psychic system. And they are next only to the karmic layer in personality. So based upon the soul journey and the karmic load, the proportion of yin and yang is decided. And that in turn decides what will be the gender of the person and what kind of experiences because of that gender orientation the person will have, because these are precisely the experiences that the soul in its soul journey and the karmic account imperative wants the person to undergo. And whatever be the moral or social aspects of it, for the person's evolution at that given point in time, this mixture of genders or this gender constellation or constitution or sort of gender junction, if you call it, is the optimum way forward for evolution of that person's soul. So from a model of the mind standpoint, from a purpose of life standpoint, and from the standpoint of exploration, development, and integration, spirituality has a slightly different approach than psychology or philosophy. Supriya, you're muted.
These concepts of yin and yang, or anima, animus, or Shiva and Shakti, Purusha and Prakriti are like more or less indicative of similar things.
Yes. They are very close
And-
concepts to each other, very, very close.
Right.
In rough, crude terms, we can almost take them as synonyms. Unless we go deeper and we go in
Right.
fine splitting and meticulous
Right.
separation of finer concepts, in everyday rough parlance, they are almost synonyms.
Yeah, so for a common person's understanding, as we said in our question, that in everyday life, how we can use them. So in a generalized sense, these are very similar concepts.
Yes, yes.
So how a common person can use them in his or her day-to-day life to understand various phenomena and himself or herself also can be very useful.
Yes, because if we make that use of this concept, then these concepts become more philosophical concepts which can be put to use everywhere. Just as in Ayurveda, you have the concept of the Panch Mahabhut, that everything essentially is composed of the 5 elemental elements, which are not necessarily material, but they are more like metaphorical categories. So that is the Ayurveda modeling of the reality, that everything in reality is constituted by 5 elemental elements, which are metaphorical, not literal. Right? They are not substances in the real world, rather they are conceptual categories. So just as that way, you can conceptualize many things inside of a human being, outside of a human being, in society, using the concepts of yin and yang. I'm not saying the yin and yang concept is a substitute of the Panch Mahabhut concept, rather it's a complementary part. That the way the Panch Mahabhut come together, they acquire certain characteristics which can be classified as yin or yang. So the Panch Mahabhut is a more primary category, and yin and yang is the one of the first second level categories from which everything can be explained. A normal person may not go into these niceties. He may just look at yin and yang in areas of his relationships and in areas of social design, if people get together for designing some society. And we also see the idea of yin and yang very archetypally depicted in movies and arts and in our imagination, where we try to imagine as pure a depiction of yin and yang as possible. And
Maybe,
I think
yeah.
this also leads to what I call the surreal frustration. The quest for a perfect yin woman or a yang man. And that also leads to a surreal frustration within our minds. This search for the perfect pure yin and yang.
Right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Vaidya, for bringing in and discussing this very interesting concept with all of us. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.